It
everybody.
really is. Yeah, and honestly, that's where the Bad Bunny stuff matters as much as anything. Is that we're talking about Hispanic voters that they're alienating.
Yeah, so I'll just start off as people come into the room. I wrote a piece for my Substack on Monday. I talked about the Bug Bunny big I almost said Bugs
Bad
Bunny.
Bunny.
Bad Bunny issue. You know, uh, oh my God, 675 people in here all of a sudden. That's crazy. Wow. So, what was interesting about the Bad Bunny thing is that, look, there wasn't even really a lot of ambiguity about the way conservatives were talking about um, this issue. They were criticizing the NFL for having somebody who spoke Spanish and who is not part of sort of the, I guess, conservative culture. And look, it's what's one thing I've been struck by in the Trump years is the almost unambiguous racism of many conservatives, including, of course, the president. But there's a political cost to all of this. I mean, if you look at the polling, there's like no demographic group in which Republicans have fared worse in the past year or fallen off worse than Hispanic voters. The drop off is significant. You saw this in Texas last week, a 50-point shift in a special election in Texas. 50 points. In New Jersey, in the gubernatorial election, the biggest swings against from Republican to Democrat came in predominantly Hispanic areas of New Jersey. Now, there's not a huge Hispanic population, but it is a notable minority of a population. So it's just that they're having all these problems with Hispanic voters. I think largely, because of immigration and the economy, and they are further alienating this group of voters. I find it really remarkably dumb politically. And I also just want to say on another note, like at some point, Democrats might actually wisen up and make Puerto Rico a state. And if they were to do that, I
Look
do
at
think
him
that
weaving in his favorite
my
topic.
favorite my favorite thing, but, they should. But, like, the more that Republicans alienate Puerto Rican voters, the better that idea looks for Democrats. So I just think it's an incredibly foolish, political strategy, but the problem this is what I wrote about on Monday, the problem for Democrats and Republicans is that a good amount of their support comes from voters who just don't like immigrants and don't like brown people. That's just a reality. I mean, we know that racism has informed support for Trump since the beginning. So, it's like it's very hard for them to appeal to Hispanic voters when they have when racism and anti-Hispanic discrimination is so much a part of their coalition. Now they could get past that in 24 because the economy was bad and Hispanics were upset about that, and a lot of them shifted to Trump. But you've seen what happened over the past year. The combination of the economy and the immigration policies, they have screwed the pooch, if I can quote from the right stuff, on with Hispanic voters, and it's a disaster. By the way, let's say for the record, we have 800 people in the room right now.
This
That
is
is,
great.
I don't know how that happened, but I am overjoyed.
Somebody's
So,
promoting us.
yeah,
But
exactly.
welcome. The water is warm,
The water is
and
warm.
we hope that you join us regularly now. But I couldn't agree more. And it's not even just that they criticize Bad Bunny being the halftime show. Look, the irony of me talking about this is I probably agree with them more on music than most. I couldn't have named a single Bad Bunny song. I would have much rather seen Pearl Jam or Kenny Chesney or a country or rock artist because that's the music I listen to. But here's the thing: he's one of the
Wait, wait,
biggest
wait, wait,
act.
wait. You listen to Kenny Chesney?
Yeah, I've
All right,
been
we're done.
I
We're done. We're done. We're done. I'm moving
I've
on.
liked
We're done.
country music for decades.
Okay.
But that taste faux pas aside in Michael's world, it, it is Bad Bunny. We're talking about a big enough star that there was legitimate conversation in October of 2024 about whether he could flip the election by endorsing one of the candidates. And not only did they attack him, but they attacked him in the most starkly racist language that you could think of. He's not American. Yeah, Billy Joel. There's a good
No,
that.
no, no,
Oh, oh,
no.
oh,
I hate Billy Joel. I'm sorry to the person who said that in the chat.
oh. See, now we're throwing you out of New York, New
I
Jersey,
No, no, no.
Philadelphia.
Billy Joel is the worst. I hate him. I can't stand his music. I'll tell you a story. When I was 14 years old, I went to camp, and the boys' cabin was across from the girls' cabin, and there was a girl over there who used to play Billy Joel's greatest hits like every day, and I just came to despise him, and so I just can't. He's like him and the Eagles. they're just the worst, in my opinion.
Another artist I've seen 5 times live, I think.
Oh, God, Brian.
But here I'm just being a classic middle, New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia
100%.
person.
100%.
Um, but it is it's been very stark. Like they're criticizing Bad Bunny for not speaking in English, his songs not being in English, and saying he's not American, even though he's from Puerto Rico.
He is an American
And in
citizen.
fact, the was it Jake Paul, the UFC guy, I think he
Yeah,
is. I didn't even really know who he was. He apparently lives in Puerto Rico and was still calling Bad Bunny not American for
amazing.
being from Puerto Rico. But
Amazing.
this is just so incredibly racist. And they are drowning with these voters. They are
Yeah.
drowning with Hispanic voters who they were making inroads with.
Mhm.
And they are just, it's like they're asking themselves, is it possible that we can put Texas and Florida in play in November? Like that seems to be the goal. Like this is what you do if you were trying to do that.
But to that
Um,
yeah, but to that point, I think what's interesting to think about is that a lot of the reason why Democrat or Republicans redistricted in Texas was based on a belief
yeah,
that the gains they had made with Hispanic voters would be replicated in 2026. And I think what we're seeing is that prediction is not look like it's going to come to
mhm.
fruition. And so I'm not saying, look, if I were to wager, I would bet that the Republicans probably win all 5 of those races. They're certainly favored. Those are plus Trump districts, but they're much more in play now than when this whole redistricting thing happened back in the fall. They're
I
much more in
actually
play. You
disagree with
disagree?
that.
You
I
disagree? Okay.
think that the two seats where Democrats have incumbents, Vicente Gonzalez and Henry Cuellar down in South Texas, are lean Democratic seats at this point.
Hmm.
Because
Okay.
those guys are veteran incumbents. They won in 2024, and the environment is just going to be better for Democrats. In the other three seats, one of them is a definite gain for Republicans. The other two, there's for probable Republican gains, but in one of them they're running a former sheriff, the Democrats, which is a kind of interesting profile.
Sure.
But
Sure.
I would expect Republicans to probably pick up at least two, probably three. And I think that long term, Democrats may have problems with those Rio Grande Valley seats in South Texas. But right now, not only are those two, I think, lean Democratic, but the third seat, and we talked about this last week, Democratic candidate, there's a Republican Congresswoman, I forget her name, in South Texas. And the Democratic candidate is a guy named Bobby Polito. And Bobby Polito had the greatest humble brag I have ever seen in a newspaper story last week.
I saw this. Yeah.
He
Go ahead.
said he said he was reading about I think it was about the Texas specials Texas State Senate special election results, and he said he was reading about it while he was in the an event for Grammy nominated artists because he is a Tejano singer and he was a
That's right.
Grammy nominated artist. And this guy has a really interesting profile. He named one of his kids, I think it is Remington, because of the arms company. So he is certainly no bleeding heart liberal.
Right.
Um, and so Democrats have a shot in that race. And like that gerrymander could become a dummy mander, at least for the cycle.
Right.
And it really is a cautionary note. In April, Ron DeSantis has called the Florida legislature back to try to gerrymander. And they
Yeah.
were going to try to gerrymander South Florida even further. And now there's some question as to
I
how much they want to take on there.
I actually at this point would be a little bit surprised because I just think the danger is too significant. Now, look, Florida is not Texas, and Texas, Trump's numbers are worse in Texas than they are in Florida. I think there's more indication, particularly from the special election we saw last week, that there is more of a possibility that Texas is, I don't say in play. Well, yeah, in play. It's more in
And
play, I think.
eh,
But Florida, not so much. The Democratic candidates who are running statewide are not as strong. Um, but yeah, I think there's some real question that Florida wants to do this. One other thing to make in general, look, Democrats have generally done better in the last couple of cycles with Hispanic voters, right? Hillary, I think, got 65%, something like that. Biden did a little worse. Trump lost them by, I believe, 3 points. That's the Pew number. I think the other pollsters, Catalyst has a different number, but it was close, put that way. But so the point being, I think here, but if you look at midterms, by the way, Democrats do very well with Hispanic voters in the midterm elections. So I just want to think, but I think it's important to be clear. One thing we saw from 24 is Hispanic voters are a little more up for grabs. I think people realized, right? With black voters, there's much more race consciousness of black voters. They just are not going to vote for Republican candidates in any significant way. Some of them did shift to Trump in 2024, but it was still 80+% of black voters were voting for Democrats. You're not going to see that really change. I think with Hispanic voters, I tend to think Democrats will have a continued advantage. Will they win 65% of the Hispanic vote if going forward? Sometimes they will, but sometimes they won't. I think the point is that Hispanic voters are much more up for grabs. I think people realize. So even if Democrats do better in 26 Hispanic voters, I wouldn't necessarily assume that means that suddenly Hispanics are back in the Democratic camp.
Yeah.
But I do think that, look, one example that I kind of think about with Hispanic voters is what happened in California. Right in California, this is going way back. In 1994, Republicans pushed what was the proposition that would basically ban
Oh, I'm
uh,
blanking on the number, but it took services away from
yes, from
yeah, from
undocumented.
Hispanic voters.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
let,
can't
let
remember
me
exactly what but basically they pushed policies that were really um opposed to the
Proposition
Hispanic community.
187.
Right, 87, thank you.
Yeah.
These policies were seen as, attacking the Hispanic community. And one of the results of that was that Republican support for good point, Helen, get to that in a second.
Yeah.
One of the
Me
things
too.
that I think that happened is in California, at least, is Hispanic voters just abandoned the Republican Party, and you've seen that now going on 30 years actually of that abandonment occurring. I don't think you'll see
And
that
by the
real
way,
hard.
it took California from being a swing state to being a deep blue state.
It is crazy to think about that in 1992, when Clinton won it, that was a bit of a surprise because Bush won it in '88, and now California is a solidly Democratic state. Harold Bloomfield makes the point: lots of cultural conservatism among Hispanic voters. Good point. That is something that is an issue, and I've made this point before. I know it's a tough for people to hear, but you know, uh, Democrats did worse with Hispanic voters when they had a female nominee. They did worse with it, and it was mostly among Hispanic men. There was a drop off in that support. So you do see that kind of conservatism. It is an issue. It's an issue with black voters. Actually, it's an issue with all male voters because, as Brian and I discussed, we are as men we are the worst. But it's an issue. But I do think that in this cycle, at least, Republicans have a major Hispanic problem. Oh my gosh, look at this, Brian. We have 1,000 people.
Thousand people.
Welcome,
Welcome
everybody.
aboard. Yeah, make sure you hit that like button as you're coming in so we
Please
can
do.
go even bigger. We'll set some records here. But
And,
I
and if you haven't already, just really quickly
subscribe.
subscribe
Yep.
to The World According to Brian, Brian's Substack, subscribe to Truth and Consequences, my Substack. Great to have you here. If you have questions, things you want us to talk about, please put them in the comments. We will
Mm,
address almost any issue you think of in this. And before we close the book on Bad Bunny, I wanted to say for the record that was an incredible halftime show.
yeah.
And I'm not a big fan of Big Bad Bunny's music. I don't know it that well. I was just blown away by the production design, the immersiveness of that presentation, the celebration of Puerto Rican culture. It was just it was a beautiful event. I really loved it. And this is somebody, again, this is not part of my world, but I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was wonderful. I really loved it. And, it just kind of shows that, like, you don't have to love the guy's music to appreciate what he's able of doing as an artist. And
And oh, by the I
yeah,
was
go ahead,
going to
sir.
just say, oh, by the way, Michael and I are not the target audience for the halftime show. It is
No, we're
for
not.
people, they're looking especially towards women usually because of gendered ideas about who's tuning in for the football, basically. But I want to build off of what Michael said about Hispanic voters. I think it is absolutely true that first of all, they've always swung back and forth, and we should not talk about them as a monolith. Cubans in South Florida are a lot more conservative than Puerto Ricans in New York
Absolutely.
or Orlando area and some of those other areas. And then, you have these diverse populations. You have Mexican Americans, especially in the West. So we shouldn't see them as a monolith. And it is absolutely true that Democrats have some issues with them because they are culturally conservative, by which we mean, down in South Texas, they are probably gun owners. They are churchgoers. A lot of them are pro-life. Those are just rough edges for Democrats. And here's the thing with the two parties on this. Even on immigration, a lot of Hispanic voters are okay with cracking down on
Yeah.
undocumented migrants. They say we came here legally or our family members came here legally or these people are competing with us for jobs. In South Texas, especially, a lot of their family members work for CBP or ICE. And it's a job thing. Okay.
Yep.
However, what they're not okay with is doing this, first of all, ripping people out of communities. And they're not okay with doing this in the most racist way possible. They're not okay with people being pulled over because of the color of their skin. We've had, how many police officers and others who've had issues because they're not white, where ICE and CBP are harassing them.
Yeah.
Hispanic voters are not okay with that kind of racism, and Republicans seem hell bent on alienating them. And whether Democrats can take advantage of that longer term, I don't know. I honestly think that the first party that actually gets back to comprehensive immigration reform is going to be the one that does better on this issue, at least for the medium term. Because as we saw with Joe Biden, and I will clarify here, I tend to be more of an open borders guy myself. That's where my own personal philosophy lies. But for a political party, comprehensive immigration reform, where you're going to have a closed border, you're going to have, a enhanced legal immigration process, and where you do something for people who have been here for decades and are part of communities, and you provide them with a pathway to citizenship and the Dream Act and those kinds of things. That's where I think most Americans are. But as Michael said before, we can't underscore this enough. The problem for Republicans is their base are the people who hate that. Their base are
Yeah.
the people who've been stopping comprehensive immigration reform for 20 years.
So to that point, I want to just mention something. There was a new poll out today from NBC that shows Trump's numbers on immigration is on both border security and immigration. He is at 40% approval, 60% disapproval. That in June, that number was +2 for Trump, and by June is when the numbers already begun to decline by June, but you've seen basically, I guess, like a 22-point shift in support. So what I think is sort of interesting here that is important about this is that you made this point. I think you're exactly right. People actually really, Americans really do support deporting illegal immigrants, violent
Mm.
illegal immigrants, right? I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
it's like 80
it's
something percent. But I saw there was a poll, Ipsos poll, that I was very, very interesting to me. You ask people, do you support deporting people who've committed crimes like shoplifting? And it was over 60%. So people are okay with deporting criminals, even if they've committed, nonviolent offenses. What they don't support is deporting people who've lived here for, say, a decade, people who have children here, people who came here as children, right? The dreamers, and people who have just entered the country, which is, of course, not a crime. It's a civil offense. So, to that point, there's a new report out from DHS that was, I guess, leaked to CBS News that shows that of the 400,000 people who have been detained, 400,000 people have been detained since Trump took office, okay, that 14% of them are violent criminals, 1 out of 7, and that 40% of them have committed no crime. They've either overstayed a visa or they are living in the country illegally. Again, not a crime. That is something that's usually handled in the immigration system, not in the criminal system. So you're talking about 150,000 people who have been rounded up by ICE, who have committed who have no criminal record, are not charged with a crime, haven't been convicted of a crime. That's the problem that this administration has. People don't support that. And they don't support the kind of things that ICE is doing, right? The numbers on ICE are really bad. And we can talk about how unpopular ICE has become, how unpopular their tactics have become. Um, so this is, to me, a great example of of an own goal by this administration, right? If Trump had just focused on deporting violent criminals, even just deporting people who committed a crime, I actually think his numbers on immigration would be better, but I think his overall numbers would be better.
yeah.
But of course, he didn't do that. He turned immigration policy, to deportation policy, over to Stephen Miller, who is a fascist and a white supremacist, as far as I can tell. Which is weird since he's Jewish, but it's true. And the result is the kind of what someone in the comments brilliantly put it: the cruelty, the brutality, and the arrogance of these punk thugs. Yeah, that's what's happened. And they have just blown the opportunity on this issue. So I would ask you a question, Brian. I'm curious what you think about this, because I was thinking about this the other day. Like, there's still these like pundit bros out there, like, well, Democrats don't have a plan on immigration. People don't trust them. Do you think Republican candidates this November are going to run on immigration?
you will have some who do, but they're going to be in deep red districts
Exactly.
who, you know,
Exactly.
where their constituents are Stephen Miller's, and you brought up Stephen Miller. I was thinking the other day, George Wallace used to say, I'm getting ready to teach George Wallace, and he used to say in some speeches, he would talk about how Democrats wanted to coddle criminals because, you know, they didn't get enough watermelon as like a
Enough
10
watermelon
year
when they
old,
were children.
and I was
So
openly
racist.
thinking, you know,
So racist.
I was openly thinking, what was Stephen Miller deprived of as a child while I was reading this to make him such a
You
sociopath?
know what the answer to that question is, Brian? Love.
Love,
Love.
yeah. But anyway, I really do think that Republicans are going to have to run away from immigration. They
Yeah.
are going to
Yeah.
have to, you know, it is the worst own goal that I think I've ever seen by a party. Because they had a huge advantage on this issue last year. At this time last year, and actually it was January, I think. The Lake and Riley Act was passing with Democratic support.
Yep.
Um, and Democrats were certainly not impeding, you know, Trump's immigration agenda initially because they were back on their heels. The understanding was Joe Biden had let too many people in, he hadn't secured the border, and
Yep.
people wanted this, and that this was a loser issue for Democrats. And in a year, Trump has squandered all of that because we just keep getting videos and images of things and stories. The guy, or it was a woman, whose skull was broken by ICE,
Yeah.
where they've done deplorable, horrible, criminal things, and it has permeated the public consciousness, and people are not okay with this. They are not okay with law
No.
enforcement acting like a bunch of criminals. And now Republicans are digging in on, well, we have to let them mask. And it is the dumbest argument I have ever heard. They're like, well, we're worried about them being doxxed. Well, guess what? Every police officer in America, with the exception of, like, you know, undercover folks, have badges with their names and their numbers on
Exactly.
them. That is part of what makes them different. I mean, for crying out loud, if masked people could just pull up in an unmarked SUV and drag people out of the car, that's called kidnapping. It looks like the scenes, Michael, in an action movie that's
I
going to
know.
set this up.
I know. I know.
It, it
But
it's
but to
it's
your point,
absolutely awful.
I think I mentioned this last week, but to me, it is like one of the more fascinating poll results that I've seen recently. The Ipsos poll has asked people over the past year which party has a better plan, policy, or approach to immigration. Now, in January of last year, it was 43-21 Republicans over Democrats. Today, it is 37-32. So that's a 17-point shift from 22-point advantage to 5-point advantage. But what I think is most interesting about those numbers is that 21% of Americans said they thought Democrats had a better plan, policy approach. Now it's 32%. So an 11-point increase for people trusting Democrats on this issue, even though Democrats really haven't changed I mean, there's no sort of organizing group to change Democrats' policies on immigration. It's a backlash to what Republicans are doing, and basically people saying, like, I don't know what Democrats are, or I'm not sure what their policy is, but it's better than what we have now. So again, and let's be clear, that's not a Trump number. That's a Republican Party number. So that's the really, to me, the interesting thing about this is that you'd expect, look, Trump's numbers are going to fall in some ways along with if his approval numbers fall, you'll see a similar fall on issues as well. Like, in other words, people will, if he goes from 50 to 30 on an approval, and I'm making that number up, you're going to see probably a similar or close similar drop in immigration, economy, and other issues as well. But you're seeing this affecting the party. The people don't trust Republicans on this issue the way they used to. That's a really, I mean, look, we saw this in Trump's first term also, but that just shows, I think, again, how much they have just, using the right stuff again, screwed the pooch on this issue, and in a way that has really, really hurt Republicans.
And their obsession with undocumented migrants, and frankly, their racism and hatred, is leading them to other mistakes. The House is going to vote again on the Save America Act today, and this is a bill that aims to solve a problem that doesn't exist, which is non-citizens voting.
Right.
And what they're doing is you'd have to produce a proof of citizenship to register to vote. And you either have to have a birth certificate and a license that matches that, which is a problem for millions of married
I
American
think
women.
I believe, well, also, but I think only six, like, they can use a license, a real ID
Right.
license.
It
Only
has to be
six states, I believe, have a real ID license right
right.
now.
Right. You have to have a real ID license and a birth certificate, or you have to have a passport. which costs 60 something dollars to have. So it's basically a poll tax. And Democrats now can sit there and scream about how they want to disenfranchise married women. The party of families is against married women. These are just repeated own goals. And I'll tell you, Michael, it goes a step beyond that, which is I've been thinking about everything swirling this week, and we're going to talk about some of the rest of it as we go here. But I've been thinking about the fact that Americans care about the economy. Americans care about their own bottom line, and Republicans are off focused on being racist. They're off focused on protecting masked ICE agents, marauding through cities. They're off worried about the halftime show.
I mean,
Uh,
Randy Fine, who might be the biggest clown in all of the House, basically is calling on the FCC to investigate um, the Bad Bunny show because I guess
Look,
there were
Michael, it was
curse
worse than
words
Janet
in
Jackson.
Spanish.
It was worse than Janet Jackson. It was Spanish. It
I mean,
scarred their little snowflake
look,
ears.
but this is the problem. It's like a prisoner's dilemma. Like you have people like Randy Fine who are in seats that are safe red seats, and I guess they think their constituents like this kind of rhetoric and like this kind of hate mongering, and so plays for him in his district, but it hurts the party's brand as a
And
whole.
it gets them on Fox News. And that's what
Gets
most
him
of these
fucked.
people are worried about is getting on, the media, becoming fundraising stars. And it really, if they don't rein this in, there are real ramifications, both short term and long term. Look, as I said, Michael and I have said this over and over again. I'm skeptical about Democrats winning Texas until we actually see it because
Right.
I go back to 2002. I was a college student, and Ron Kirk, the mayor of Dallas, was a different kind of Democrat who was going to solve their then decade long problem. And we've had about five candidates like that over and over and over and over again, and it never comes to fruition. But they are really pushing to lose Texas. Texas has these big cities that are
Ooh,
voter bases and suburbs
that guy's
that are voter bases for Democrats, right? They have Dallas, you have Houston, you have Austin. Those are big voter bases, and Republicans are suffering, as we saw in the special election last week. They are suffering in the suburbs too, around those cities. Now, if you start alienating Hispanic voters, that is the recipe. Cratering in the suburbs and losing Hispanic voters that leave us in a situation in which Texas is actually competitive.
so I'm going to keep making this point because for some reason my AirPod's not working. But okay, I'll make this point that I think is really important. That look, how did Republicans win in 2024? How did Trump win? You got a lot of occasional Trump voters who don't vote in other elections to come out and vote for him. Okay, that was a huge factor. A lot of Democrats stayed home, not so much in the swing states, but certainly rest of, like in California, New York, Illinois, big states. A lot of them stayed home. That's two things. The other thing is that he made improvements, inroads with young people and Hispanic voters and slightly black voters, but not as much. But there was some of that as well. So, okay, you're not going to get the occasional Trump voters to come out and vote for you because it's an off-year election and Trump's not on the. It's a midterm election and Trump's not on the ballot. And you've seen this in 2018. You saw it in 2022. Republicans just do not do as well, and Trump isn't on the ballot. That's just. I mean, look, that's a sample size of two. I'll grant you that, but it's certainly the case. And when you throw in the special elections as well and off-year elections, it does seem as though Republicans have a problem with turnout when Trump isn't on the ticket. So right there, you're losing a lot of voters. Second, Democrats might have stayed home in 2024. They sure as hell ain't staying home in 2026. Okay. I wanted to mention at the beginning of the thing. I'll bring it up now. We had two more special elections this past week in Louisiana. There was a 37-point shift on a House seat that Republicans thought they could flip, a seat that Trump won in 2024, held by a Democrat. Democrat retired or got a promotion, got a new job. They thought they'd flip it. They lost it. 37-point shift. In Oklahoma, 30-point shift. So again, enthusiasm on Democrats, sky high.
And Michael, we might actually, in the last half hour, we've gotten some really intriguing information. We might actually get a federal special election that is really intriguing. Neil
In
Dunn.
Florida. Wait,
Yeah,
hold on. Let me finish the point, then I want to get to
yeah,
that. But let me
okay.
finish this point. So you got occasional Trump voters staying home. You got Republicans, Democrats coming out in bigger numbers, and the places where you made inroads in 2024, you've alienated those groups. Again, I mentioned this earlier. I'll mention it again. The biggest demographic shift is from Hispanic voters going against the GOP and against Trump. So where the hell are Republicans going to get the votes from? I mean, seriously. Like their base is is now on non-college educated white voters. Beyond that base of voters, where's their support coming from? They're getting killed with women. They're getting killed with young people. They're getting killed with Hispanics. I mean, this is like all the ingredients to a massive blue wave in November.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I mean, we saw we got polling the other day on young men that was abysmal for the GOP. But like
yeah,
here's a headline from CBS News that it speaks to their problem. A Georgia Army veteran who spent nearly 5 decades in the United States was deported to Jamaica following a routine traffic stop. Americans simply don't
they don't
support
like
that.
it. They
They
don't
don't
like
like
it.
that. They really do not like it, and they are alienating these folks in ways that are going to be catastrophic come November. The only thing Republicans have going for them is they have a lot of money, and that is something that they didn't have a huge money advantage in 2018. But even then, there are limits as to how much money can save you when voters are surly. And what was saying about a special
When
election.
voters are surly. That's a good line, Brian. That's a
Yeah,
good line.
I tried. The special elections we've had at the federal level have been districts that were frankly unwinnable for Democrats. And we have another one that may be coming up that matters on two levels. In the last half hour, reporters asked Neil Dunn, who is a retiring member from North Florida, from the Panhandle, about rumors that he's going to resign imminently. And he said, I have no comment on that at this time. Well,
That's
that
a yes.
tells you that yes. Okay. And this is not a district that most Democrats would have a shot in. However, apparently this is a district that Gwen Graham was considering running again in.
Oh,
And Gwen
interesting.
Graham held a seat in North Florida before a Republican seat. She is the daughter of the former senator and governor Bob Graham. Um, and she is and I'm about to be joined. This is Clover. She wants us to get more.
Oh,
um
hello. Because
yeah
we have
she
so many followers today, we're bringing
yeah
the dogs in. I like it.
yeah
I like it.
she's like, I'm here, so I would like to pay attention to you. But
Adorable. Adorable.
Gwen Graham held the seat, and she should have been the Democratic nominee for Senate in 2018. She was the uh
No,
she was
governor.
the no, senator. She was, or governor. You're right. It was governor. She
He
was the
lost the
strongest
primary to
candidate,
Gillum.
and she lost the primary to Andrew Gillum because another candidate and she got into an ad war and went um and went kind of negative on each other, and he slid through as the third guy. But that was why she gave up her seat, and apparently she's thinking about running again. She's openly mused about how she's got experience winning Republican seats. Well, based on what Michael's talking about, if you get a Gwen Graham candidacy in a special election, that is a really intriguing thing. And let me tell you something: if Democrats pick up a House seat in a special election, the Republicans are just going to melt down because in terms of panic.
Well, look, I wouldn't be surprised if DeSantis were to push it back so that it wouldn't affect the House majority. But don't forget, the House majority is basically 2 seats right now, so they can only afford to lose 2 Republicans in any particular issue. Um, Listen, for those of you who have joined in, thank you so much. I mean, this is like the most we've ever had here, and we're so thrilled to have you. If you have questions, please put them in the comments. We'd
Yeah.
love to hear from you. We love getting questions because it lets us to it helps gives us new issues to talk about. Before we go on to talk a little bit about what's going on with Trump and in DC, we do need to mention another election that happened on Thursday or is it Tuesday? Tuesday, I think it was
Thursday. It was
Tuesday.
Thursday. It was Thursday. If you're
Thursday,
talking
thank
about
you.
New Jersey.
In New Jersey, where a Mikey Sherrill, who gave up her seat to run for governor, there's a special election to fill out the seat, the rest of the term, which is until November or January, excuse me. And it was a crowded primary. The favorite was Tom Malinowski, just someone I worked with many years ago at State Department when we were both speechwriters. Um, and he lost narrowly to a candidate who was, I guess, a member of Democratic Socialists of America, anti-Zionist. And what's ironic about that, the anti-Zionist part, is that AIPAC, the pro-Israel lobby, spent millions of dollars to attack Malinowski, even though he is, relatively supportive of Israel. And the result was that I think, I mean, I don't know if it's exactly because of him, but it certainly weakened his numbers and allowed this candidate, whose name I'm blanking on right now, to win the primary.
Nakia,
And
I think.
That's right. And Malinowski conceded the race this week. Now, again, keep in mind, there's another primary in June for the election in November. I don't think Malinowski is going to run, but here's the thing about this race that I think people are making too big of a deal out of. I mean, it is notable when a DSA candidate wins in suburban New Jersey, but she won with, if I'm remembering correctly, 29% of the vote, which is not that impressive. In other words, 70% of the district voted against her. She won because basically she kind of captured one sort of lane, the left wing lane of the primary, and that's what enabled her to win. I She may hold the seat in November, but I don't know that this suggests there's like people sort of took this as saying, well, there's this Tea Party movement in the Democratic Party. I don't know I don't know what you think about this, but to me that seems like overstating things pretty dramatically.
I think that there are two types of people who've said that. There are people on the left who desperately want it to be, and there are people on the right who desperately want it to be.
Yeah,
Instead, I think it shows a flawed process. You had a special election primary on a Thursday. Americans are not used to voting on Thursdays. Okay, so you have low turnout. And then because we don't have ranked choice voting, we're in a situation where the establishment candidates got more than 60% of the vote.
right.
And this candidate got 29.1%. We're not even talking a third of the voters voted for her. And we have people drawing grand conclusions. To me, it's more about the systemic flaw that we can have a special election primary on a Thursday and someone gets 29% and becomes a member of Congress. Now, I will say it is a case where there's risk here for Democrats, okay? There is a real risk for Democrats, which is that this is only a D+8 seat. This is a seat that Mikey Sherrill had to work really hard to win in 2018, and that has, while swinging to the Democrats, is certainly, not the not a guarantee layup forever seat. And I would think, and Michael probably agrees with this, that a DSA candidate is not the right candidate for that district. At the very least, in a bad election, they could have a close election. You guys sink a lot of money into it. But I really don't think that people reading into this are understanding the dynamic, or I think that they all have self-interest involved. It's either people who want this to be because they think it's a disaster for Democrats, or want this to be because they're desperate for it to happen ideologically. And I just don't think that someone getting 29% of the vote had the establishment consolidated, and had this been even a 65-29 kind of
Yeah.
outcome with small party candidates getting a couple of percent, she would have gotten the same exact amount of the vote, and we would have been saying, okay, the establishment is holding just fine here.
So let's just say this. I think there's an election in April to fill out the seat. I assume she's going to win that election, special election, +8 seat for Democrats. Even with her left wing views, I would still assume she wins that. But there's a primary in June. If Malinowski doesn't run, and I didn't see an indication that he is going to run, then I would assume. I don't know. I shouldn't say assume. I think it's a real possibility she loses the primary in June, and is just
Yeah.
basically gets to be a congressman for 8 or 9 months, which is not bad 'cause you get a pension when you get that, and it's a pretty good deal. Now, let me say one thing about the APAC art part of this as well.
Yeah.
Uh, I have a sort of counterintuitive take on APAC's role here. So APAC went in there, and for a lot of us who follow politics, democratic politics, APAC's involvement in this race didn't make a lot of sense. Malinowski is, I'd say, with Israel, supportive of Israel, maybe 89% of the time. But APAC went after him, I guess, because he's not with them 100% of the time. And the way that I read this is that APAC sees their influence decreasing, particularly among Democrats. And their way of dealing with that is not to moderate their own views or moderate or encourage Israel to moderate its policies, or, just in general to sort of be a little bit more um, consistent with the views of Democrats. They basically were like, we're going to go in there, we're going to hurt Malinowski to send a message to other Democrats who are thinking of wavering in their support for Israel that this is what happens to you if you mess with us. And you could argue they were enormously successful. Now, this people will point out, well, then anti-Zionist, anti-Israel candidate won. I don't think AIPAC really cares about that. In fact, if anything, it actually kind of helps them, I think, because they can say, look at the Democratic Party. It's infused with anti-Zionist, views and politicians and so forth. So I think from their perspective, this wasn't even a bad result. Now, I say that, and then of course, I have to also mention that the response on Capitol Hill from Democrats has been incredible frustration with what AIPAC has done. Like really, real anger. And actually, Malinowski said he would not endorse any candidate in the next primary in June who's getting support from AIPAC. So he clearly is like he's. I mean, I he get why he's upset. I don't know how this plays itself out, but I actually the cynical part of me says that a lot of Democrats are going to look to see what happened in New Jersey, and they're going to say, maybe I shouldn't screw around with AIPAC because look, AIPAC has always exaggerated and promoted its political influence, its electoral influence. I don't know if it's the reason why Malinowski lost. People believe that, and that's what AIPAC wants. They want people to believe they are incredibly powerful and they can shape election outcomes. And if people believe that, if Democrats believe that, well, that could affect how some Democrats think about Israel, talk about Israel on the campaign trail between now whenever they have primaries this spring or summer.
I, I absolutely agree with Michael's analysis of what they're trying to do. And I think, yes, congratulations, you've made your point that if there's 5 or 6 candidates in a race, you can maybe, swing the outcome. However, I think this is a disastrously bad set of moves by for people who care about Israel, because the
Oh, it's
best
bad for
way
the Jews. It's
for
absolutely bad for the Jews.
absolutely bad for Jews, because if Israel, the best most stable way for Israel to have American support is for it not to be a partisan issue, and the people who are furious at AIPAC are people who are supporters of Israel, who are saying this is absurd. You set the cause back, you angered all these people, and they are at a real risk of making AIPAC look like a right-wing lobbying organization that is basically a partisan thing meddling in Democratic primaries, and they're just going to alienate people. It's a very stupid strategic move. I understand that they're trying to flex their muscles, but if you were going to do this, you really need to make sure that you didn't hand it to the other side, and elect someone worse, because it's the worst kind of cynical politics that you get
The
of
worst
like,
kind.
we'll get someone who's even worse on our issue, but hey, we took the guy down, we showed you our power. It's what everybody hates about
So let me
politics.
just mention that. So right now in Michigan, there's a Senate primary, 3 Democrats: Haley Stevens, Mallard McMorrow, and Abdul El Said. I think I'm get that
Yeah.
if that's correct. Said is basically running, and I see a lot of his emails. He is basically running on a platform of opposition to AIPAC. I would actually argue that his incessant complaints about AIPAC border on the anti-Semitic because he's basically making this sort of case that Jewish money is coming in and is trying to influence this election. I mean, there's obviously a kernel of truth to what he's saying. AIPAC is playing a role here, but he's inflating that, and I think he's doing it for political reasons. So I don't like what he's doing from a campaign perspective, but I do think what happened in New Jersey strengthens his argument, and actually, I think makes people more receptive to his argument that in fact AIPAC is playing this disruptive role in Democratic politics, and it's hard to push back on that because look what they did in New Jersey. So I do think that this is why I'm saying that I get why this might be good for AIPAC, or they think it's good for them. I think it's bad for Jews. I think it's bad for it's good for politicians who want to play on anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism to build their support, and that's bad for Jews. So I really, really am, as a Jew, I am just really bothered by what AIPAC has done in this race, and they are doing enormous damage to the American Jewish community. And by the way, just to step back to your point about Israel being a partisan issue, this is Bibi Netanyahu's thing, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this is something like I really hate it when people blame um, Israel for anti-Semitism in the U.S. because then it takes It's like blaming the victim, takes responsibility away from actual people who make anti-Semitic arguments and so forth. However, there's no question that Bibi's decision to basically ally himself and in turn Israel with the Republican Party has alienated Democrats and has really, allowed those who want to attack Israel and to make anti-Semitic arguments. It's created a more receptive audience to those arguments. So I do think that this partisan what's the word I'm looking for?
Partisanization.
Thank you, of Israel has done real damage to Jews and to the Jewish community, and has actually contributed in some part to increased anti-Semitism. I want to be clear so no one confuses it here. I blame anti-Semites for anti-Semitism. Okay, I don't blame Jews for anti-Semitism, but I also don't think that Israel's behavior or Israel's actions, particularly its intervention in American politics, I don't think they're blameless. What I would say.
Well, I would take that point and maybe go in a slightly different direction, which is to say it's stupid. It is making Israel a partisan football in a way. Whether you think it is or isn't fueling anti-Semitism is almost irrelevant to the fact that making Israel a partisan issue saps it of support and makes Democrats much less willing, the next Democratic
Yes,
administration, much less willing to support Israel. Now, I think that that goes against American interests. I think that that's bad on a lot of levels, but that's the reality of it. And to the Michigan primary that Michael's talking about, there's a lot of concern that this is a situation in which if Haley Stevens and Mallory McMurrow go at each other hard, that Al Saeed could win the primary and lose the general election. I don't think that
that's not what's happening though. What's happening, interestingly enough, is Abdul Saeed
yep,
is attacking McMorrow, which
Murrow,
I
yep.
think is a. I have to say, this is what I would call, and those of you who have been around politics a long time will know what I'm talking about. This is the Geraldine Ferraro strategy. No, 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 no. Sorry, no, no, no. That's not fair. This is the Liz Holtzman strategy. Sorry, this is the Liz Holtzman strategy.
Oh, you're gonna go back
Basically,
even further.
well, this is my favorite example. The 1992 Democratic primary for Senate, Ferraro. It was like a three-way race between Bob Abrams, Geraldine Ferraro. Was it Bob? Yeah, Bob Abrams, Geraldine Ferraro, and Holtzman was way down in the polls, and she started attacking Ferraro in order to sort of, I guess, create the lane for the female Democratic nominee, and she ended up really hurting Ferraro, but gave Abrams the boost he needed to win the primary. And I do just wonder if the same thing's happening here, which is that McMorrow and Saeed are attacking each other, that it just helps Haley Stevens become the nominee. And she's already probably the slight favorite for that seat. She's probably the more moderate of the three candidates. Although I hear from a lot of people in Michigan, she's not a very good politician. But look, if it's McMorrow or Stevens, I assume that Democrats will hold
Yeah,
up.
and let's be honest, Mike Rogers, the Republican savior who they're touting, the three Democrats went to the UAW for a forum this morning, and Mike Rogers no-showed. He was
Is that
invited.
right? I didn't see that.
Right,
No shit.
if you're going to piss off a constituency in Michigan, may I suggest that the United Auto Workers is not necessarily the one you want to piss off?
I
Um,
yes. I also just think we need to point out too that one of the reasons why Saeed is running this kind of campaign is that, you know, Michigan has the largest percentage of Arab voters in the country.
yeah,
Um, but the problem is they got a lot of Jewish voters too. I think they have more Jewish voters than they do with Arab voters, Arab American voters. I'm not so sure this is a winning strategy I mean, because
no,
for all the votes you win by attacking Israel and calling what happened in Gaza genocide, you're going to lose Jewish votes on the other side.
and
And it,
I,
and we just say McMorrow's taken the same position on she's called the war in Gaza genocide, which I think is a libel, but it's another conversation. And I think that only helps Stevens.
but I mean, she's done much more tentatively. I think the line was,
She did.
well, by the definition of like it was clearly. I don't really believe this. I don't want to say this. But I'm being pushed because I want the left lane. The one thing I would say about this primary is if we get to say the 4th of July, this is an August primary, and Al Saeed has a chance of winning. I think the establishment will come in and go negative on him
I agree.
with a lot of money because I think he's the only one who can lose this seat in a good Democratic year. Remember, Michigan, we've talked about this before. Michigan Republicans have won exactly one Senate seat since Robert Griffin was reelected in 1972, and that was in the biggest Republican wave in generations in 1994.
Right.
Democrats just need to not fumble this away, but it really is a situation where, if anything, APEC by helping Stevens is hurting Stevens, and making this a football, political football, making themselves the issue,
But
and
they're not, I
that's
mean, they're helping Stevens, but I do think, you know, I don't think, I don't know how much Said's helping himself by focusing this. And I also think he's really hurting himself by attacking McMorrow. He's attacked her on a number of issues, not just in Israel, he's around healthcare. He's gone after, I guess the idea is that if he weakens McMorrow, it'll make it a two-person race. That isn't going to happen, I don't think. And it's the strategy that lots of candidates try, and it never seems to work. Listen, we have, by the way, we're at 1.1. 1,000 people in the live Substack live today. Thank you so much for those of you who joined. Please hit that like button, and it really helps us out. And also, if you have questions, any comments, please. And
Drop them in there.
I just got these new glasses, and I'm not sure if I think they're too big. So if you have comments on those, I would love to hear.
Look
I
at
think
Michael getting fashion advice.
well, I just can't. It's so hard to decide. It's so hard to tell. So I appreciate your input. Let's talk about the Texas Senate race really quick because
Okay.
there's interesting polling out this week that shows. Well, it was one poll. It showed that Jasmine Crockett leading James Tallarico by I think 11 points or 12 points. That poll was a little outlier-ish because I've seen other polls that show Tallarico ahead. But the more interesting thing is that Turning Point USA, which is Charlie Kirk's group, which is now run by his wife Erica, they endorse Ken Paxton. Ken Paxton, serial philanderer, corrupt attorney
No,
general
wait. We need to be fair to Ken, which is his wife filed for divorce on biblical grounds.
on biblical grounds.
I mean, and again, I think this bears repeating. It is the 2020s, Michael. This is not the 1970s. I know that surprises you, but it being the 2020s, he managed to get impeached by his fellow
He
Republicans.
did.
Do you
He
know
did.
how hard that is to pull off? I can't even fathom that. These are Republicans who slavishly devote themselves to Donald Trump, the most corrupt president that we've
I know.
had in modern history. And yet they said, Ken Paxton, you're a bridge too far. We cannot we can't countenance how corrupt you are.
No
That
problem for
is
Turning Point
mind-boggling.
USA. The interesting question will be whether Trump endorses him. Uh, I know that John Thune, who is the Senate Majority Leader, has been pushing him to endorse John Cornyn, who's the incumbent. I don't know what he's going to do. One thing I'll say about this race, though, is that it's a three-person race. It is Cornyn, Wesley Hunt, who's a former, I think, congressman, if I remember correctly,
Current
and
congressman.
current congressman, excuse me,
In
sorry,
fact,
and
he is someone that the Republicans are really pissed at because he keeps missing votes, which when you have a really narrow majority is not
that's a problem.
that's problematic.
It's
Yes.
problematic. And Paxton. So no one's going to get a majority. I think none of the polls indicate that. I mean, every poll that I've seen has Paxton narrowly ahead, with Cornyn pulling up the rear. So what the problem for Cornyn is if it's a Paxton Cornyn a runoff, I don't think anyone thinks that Cornyn would win that. The only way he wins is if it's a Cornyn Wesley Hunt runoff. Then he might be able to pull it off. But if I were to wager, I think that Cornyn is. I think his career in the Senate is going to end in January. And again, I keep bringing it up, but if Paxton is the nominee, and I suspect he will be, that seat becomes very viable for Democrats. But
But
you do need James Tallarico to be the nominee. I saw this ad that Jasmine Crockett ran last week. It's like an AI. Oh my God. It was awful. It's not the issue with Crockett. I just think she's a bad nominee. I don't think she's great at politics, right? She got in the race late. She didn't raise a ton of money. She doesn't really have a ground game. I don't
Michael is
know.
being so nice. She's running a shitty campaign. Okay, they don't even know who her campaign manager is. She has
It
no
does seem that
television
way.
ads. I mean, we got this reporting this week. She has no television ads. Her campaign basically seems to be everyone knows me because I say cringy things that excite the base that they feel like are punching back at the Republicans, and I go viral. And so I get people who show up at events, and it may work because primaries are low turnout,
Yeah.
and Texas is a huge state, and James Tallarico has to build name recognition. But look, we got general election polling last week, and she was running 4 points behind Tallarico in every matchup. And that may not sound like a lot,
Oh,
but
you mean I'm sorry. You mean in head-to-head matchup, she's doing 4 points
yeah,
worse than
we're
Tallarico. Yeah,
in
against Republican.
against the Republican candidates.
Yeah.
That's right. And the thing is, that may not sound like much, but in a state like Texas, where a Democratic win is going to be like 50.5%, where it's going to be this historic breakthrough, 4 points is a lot. And it's a huge issue. And frankly, I think that we praise Chuck Schumer plenty on here, and I think he's done a tremendous job in recruiting. But this is one where he should have worked harder to keep Crockett out of this primary.
I don't think he would have had
Um,
any impact. I don't think he would have
that
had any influence on her.
that
You could
that
I might actually blame Akeem Jeffries more for that one, if you want my honest
that, that
opinion.
that's fair. And also the left wing senators who are involving themselves in primaries, some of whom are getting in on the side of Tallarico, because by the way, he's plenty far left. The attractiveness to Democrats about Tallarico is, first of all, I believe he's a minister or was a
Yeah,
divinity
he,
student,
he's very
and
religious.
he couches his positions in religious language
He does.
and can talk about religion. And he went on Joe Rogan and did well, and that's a big deal, for Democrats who struggle with the constituencies that Joe Rogan reaches. And again, because people on the internet keep taking things out of context, when these debates spark up and say, well, oh, you just don't understand things for black women and that this is about race. No, this is about a fit for a state. This is about
Yes.
Jasmine Crockett saying that when it comes to immigration, Hispanic voters have a slave mentality in a state where Democrats need to crush it with Hispanic voters to win.
I just think the point here is that Texas is a red state, and if you're going to
Yeah.
win, everything has to be lined up in your favor. And that is true for any red state. And the way to win is that you need the the ideal Republican candidate who is scandal ridden, who Republicans will not vote for or will switch sides for, and that is Ken Paxton. And you need a very good Democratic candidate. I don't think that either Tallarico or Crockett are ideal candidates. I think Tallarico is better than Crockett in the sense that I think he has more likely to have kind of appeal. This isn't a look. I'm not going to diss on Crockett as strongly. Well, I'll say this: I just think she's a bad fit for a red state
Right.
like
Yeah.
Texas. She
That I
might be.
mean,
I don't know. She might be a better fit in a blue state. I don't know. I think she's a bad fit in a place like Texas, where you really do need to win over some Republican votes. And when you've called the governor who's in a wheelchair Hot Wheels, like that is going to be used against you, and I think is going
he
to
had a
hurt
tree
your
fall on him.
ability. I'm sorry.
He had a tree fall on him. Like
Yeah,
he's paralyzed.
I
Like
don't like Greg Abbott, but I would never make fun of the fact that he's in
no.
a wheelchair. It's tragic what happened to him. So I just think it's not good. But I want to make one thing that I know you flagged this for me a couple of days ago, that there's an Axios report out that the Republicans are worried about maybe losing the Senate in November. And you know what I thought of was that gif from Die Hard where Bruce Willis throws the body out the window onto the car and he says, "Welcome to the party." Like that's what. Like where the fuck have you been? If you just now
Mhm.
realize the Senate is in danger, Senate is in real danger of oh what we just hit 1.2. Thank you
Yeah,
very much
nice.
everybody for joining. This is great. Please again leave your comments, questions. We want to hear them. But on the Senate, look, we don't. There was interesting polling out of Iowa this week that does show Ashley Hinson, who is the is it Hinton or Hinson? Hinson, right?
Hinson.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Hinson, who is the presumptive Republican nominee. It showed her below 50% with a slight lead over the various Democratic candidates. Look, polls like this, just on a personal level, I don't take that seriously because you don't have a nominee yet, and so you're asking people to come. I mean, it is hard. Like, I don't think it gives you a true sense of how close the race is just because the people don't know the nominee is going to be on the Democratic side. But what's interesting is Hinson is below 50%, which is in a red state that matters. She, by the way, is a congresswoman. She is it's an open seat because Joni Ernst is
I
not running for
believe she's a
reelection.
former TV news anchor too, which
I think
helps her
that's right.
name
I think
recognition.
that's right. Yeah, that's right. Although
Um,
it didn't help Carrie Lake very much, but then again, Carrie Lake is a crazy person. But what the
mm,
point is, like, this is another poll that shows like we have similar polling out of Alaska, similar polling out of Ohio, similar polling out of obviously Texas and Maine, and that shows that these races are close. The North Carolina poll I saw this week had Cooper ahead by a few points. I do think that that's a race the Democrats are probably going to win.
yeah.
But I just think you can't look at the Senate map and not come to the conclusion with everything I said earlier about this being a potential blue wave. I think there's a real possibility. I said 20% or 25% maybe last week or maybe last month it was. I'm now like in the 30-35% range. I think it's a real possibility. But again, it
And
relies on. Yeah, go ahead.
I said to Michael last night, it wouldn't shock me if 2 or 3 months from now we're on here saying, you know what? We can't believe we're saying this, but it's 50%. It's a 50-50 thing because of the environment. However, let me offer you the positive case, the negative case here on Iowa, because I think Iowa is indicative of a lot of things. First of all, Iowa is a place where Democrats have a very real chance of winning three of the four House seats. They currently
Yeah.
hold zero of them. They may win three. I'm fascinated by the fact that two of their three are female ministers. two of the
That is
three
interesting.
candidates, one of whom I believe is pro-life, and I think Marcy Kaptur is the only pro-life, or Marcy Kaptur and Henry Cuellar are the only pro-life
That's right.
Democrats in Congress, if I remember correctly. So very, very interesting House candidates. There's good news and bad news in this Senate poll. The good news was that when they did an informed ballot, which you always have to throw say, wait a second, what are you saying about the two candidates? So informed ballots have their issues, but they show that the Democrats, one or two of them tied in this race. And but for me, the warning for Democrats, and this applies to Ohio as well, is the Democrats all got 46 in that poll. And what we need to remember is in 2020, Teresa Greenfield, the Democratic Senate candidate, dramatically outraised and spent Joni Ernst, and she got
Right.
45.15%. In 2018, the last Democratic wave, Democrats won three of the four House seats in the state, and their gubernatorial candidate, Fred Hubble, got 47.53% of
Right.
the vote. The last time Democrats won a Senate race in Iowa was 2008, the last time Tom Harkin was reelected. And the last time they won a governor's race, believe it or not, was Chet Culver's win in 2006. And then he lost as an incumbent in 2010. All of
Right.
which is to say, my concern about Iowa and Ohio, I absolutely think Democrats are going to get to 47 or 48% in these states. But there is a decent amount of evidence that unless you're Sherrod Brown in Ohio in 2018, that there may be ceilings, that these are states that there's an open question as to whether they are winnable in even the best environments. Um, I think that in a lot of these states, I'm fairly confident Democrats are going to top 48% in the Senate races in Alaska, in Texas, in Iowa, in Ohio. But can they get the last 2%? Can they get over the line? The thing I'm going to be looking for in polling is, do we see polling with showing the Democrat over 50 in any of these races? If not, even if they're ahead, there's real risk here. And I think that that's going to be the uncertainty going into election day, where we're going to have to say, is the national environment enough to take states that are R plus double digits and flip them? And
Yeah.
that is going to be the open question, and it's one we're probably not even going to be able to answer before election day, because it's a real question of those last couple of points. These races are going to be close now. And it really Republicans have made this very competitive very quickly.
Well, one thing I think I'm just going to mention that I think is sort of interesting is that the what we're seeing right now are RV polls, registered voter polls,
Yeah.
and we haven't really seen among likely voters. And someone I bring this up because someone just sent me a poll came out today. This is from I think it was Third Way. They asked generic ballot, congressional ballot, young men 18 to 29.
Yeah, this was
Democrats have an
I
eight.
was talking about this before.
They
That
have
was
an
what I was
18 point.
referring to.
Oh, you were okay. Sorry. So
Yeah.
I'll just go. I'll give the specific numbers here. Democrats had an 18-point lead among registered voters, 54-36. But among likely voters, it's a 61-31 lead, which is a 30-point lead. So 12 points higher among likely voters. Uh, that is an interesting number, and I this is something I was actually thinking about before I saw this. That the we are relying on registered voters right now. The polling. When we get to likely, I'm curious. When we get to likely voters, whether you begin to see a wider gap opening up between the two parties. Because again, it's important to keep in mind that midterm elections are not like presidential elections. Turnout is lower. It's not low or it's not like in special elections, it's pretty low, but it tends to be somewhere in the middle between special elections and midterm and presidential elections. Midterms tend to attract people who vote often, which right now used to be Republicans, but now are Democrats. Democrats are educated voters, suburban voters, women tend to vote in higher numbers in midterms, and those are groups that have moved toward Democratic Party. So I do wonder whether you're going to see more movement toward Democrats when you see more likely voter screens. I mean, look, it's so early; it's still February. I mean, we're still like 9 months away. I just think that the path to Democrats winning both the House and the Senate is becoming increasingly clear. And I know that people are concerned about and no one mentioned the comments, but I'm sure somebody will, about Trump trying to, interfere in these elections and steal elections. This is not a major concern that I have. I've never had this concern. I always thought these fears are overstated, primarily because it's very hard for a president to interfere in local state elections, because Republicans, by and large, I mean, almost uniformly, have rejected the kind of whining that Trump did after he lost in 2020. Kerry Lake is the only exception to that, really, but pretty much Republicans regularly concede when they lose now, unlike Trump, who's never conceded he lost anything. Um, and I also think that, because there's so many ways to vote now, you can vote by mail, you can vote early. It's just a lot harder to interfere in an election than it would have been when people just voted at the polls on election day.
And so I was sitting here frantically digging this up. The argument, Latcha Jane does polling for the argument, and the split ticket guys do polling for the argument. And he tweeted on February 1st that their last poll's generic ballot was D+4. Among the most enthusiastic voters, those who say they would definitely vote in 2026, it was D+12. So I absolutely agree with Michael that when we get to likely voter screens, in fact, I was teaching my students about this the other day. When we get to likely voter screens in the summer or fall, I think that you're going to see a jump, because I do think that the Democrats are more likely to vote than the Republicans. And I think that when you see some of those polls are now broken down in high turnout model, medium turnout, low turnout, I think you're going to see that Democrats are winning on who's turning out. And so I would expect a jump in a lot of these things. And look, it's early. We're not getting a lot of specific polling yet in races. As Michael said, in a place like Iowa, we don't even have a candidate, so you can't really have a good horse race polling. Same thing in Texas. Um, but I do think that as we start to get race by race polling, and as we get to likely voters, you're going to all of a sudden see people say, oh crap, this is going to be a much more massive wave than we think. The other thing about polling that am constantly pointing out to people is that polling is only as good as the pollsters' understanding of what they think the electorate's going to be
Yeah.
in terms of who's going to show up. And
Yep.
I think that this is going to shift over the next couple of months. We're now into the election year. But a lot of polling that you've seen over the last year was influenced by the 2024 electorate and what the electorate looked like in 2024. And a midterm electorate, as Michael says, is different from a presidential electorate. So, in so much as they have been hedging their bets and kind of saying, well, 2024 was a pretty good environment for Republicans, I think that you're going to start to see their modeling shift, and that's also going to produce a big Democratic jump in the
So
polling.
I want to say to that point, and I'm going to slightly take a vector lap here. I made this point after the New Jersey and Virginia elections that, the polling in New Jersey was way off. It was off by double digits. And part of the reason, I think, was that their conception of what the electorate would look like was just wrong. And they were basing it off of the 2024 election, which I think increasingly, I said this before, but I truly believe this was an anomaly election. Um, and so I thought what would happen after the election is that pollsters would change their voter screens, or would change, how they're weighting their polls, and you'd see worse numbers for Trump. And that's exactly what's happened. These numbers have gotten worse. Now, I was struck by something this week that the New York Times, I think it went back up. It was at 40. His approval rating in the Times, their average had him at 40%, which is the lowest it's been all year. It's back at 41 today. But I want to just read to you, so they do this thing that I like a lot. They differentiate between select pollsters, and who are the good pollsters, and then the other pollsters who they don't think are as good. So among select pollsters, here is Trump's approval rating, just just for the last 10 or so. Quinnipiac
Yeah.
37%. Marist 39%. Marquette 42%. Pew 37%. Beacon Research, that's Fox News, 44%. That feels a little outlierish. Ipsos 38%. American Research Group 35%. That feels a little outlierish too, to be honest. Um, Emerson, which I'm surprised they consider select a good pollster, 43%. The New York Times, 40%. My point being that among the better pollsters, they are Trump's numbers are really bad. And I do think, and I think you're right. I think that they have changed the way the polling has changed a little bit, evolved a little bit since November, and you're seeing worse results for him. But since we're talking about Trump, let's actually talk a little bit about the utter and complete incompetence of this administration, because it is a topic that we do enjoy talking about. And two things I want to mention. One is, did you hear, Brian, about the story that the El Paso airport was going to close for a week? This was
I
announced
saw the
last
headline
night.
this morning. I saw the headline this morning and was sort of like, well, that is more competence from our wonderful
N
administration.
Not
And then
so fast, because you
yeah,
know why it got closed down?
because of some drone thing.
The U.S. military shot down a party balloon near El Paso, thinking it was a foreign drone, which is what led to the airspace closure.
Attaboy Pete.
Attaboy,
Attaboy
Pete.
Pete. You're doing a great job
Keeping up the
there.
good work.
I mean,
Exactly.
I actually think that Trump is hurting himself really badly. In the first term, he fired everyone. That was like his brand. He's like, I got to keep my apprentice brand going. This term, he's decided, I think in part because these people are just total brown nosers who will do whatever he says. I mean, Pam Bondi's performance this morning in the
Ugh,
House
appalling.
was
Appalling.
screaming at congressmen. I've never seen a cabinet
Never
secretary
seen that before.
in
Absolutely
either
appalling.
party do that. And I can honestly tell you that had one of George W. Bush's attorney generals done that, he would have fired them
They would have
for
fired
it.
him. I agree with you, by the way.
You know that there's just a there's propriety, there's just, you know, the way you behave in a congressional hearing, and that's not it. um
Right.
but Trump has decided that firing people is a weakness, and it has influenced the fact that he lets Pam Bondi go and scream on television, basically looking, trying to look like a fighter to appeal to him. It's Pete Hegseth, the utterly incompetent defense secretary, who the only thing that has saved Trump there is that we haven't had a real incident where the military has had to do something, you know, critical.
Well,
Uh,
I mean, Jesus Christ, they've committed fucking war crimes in the Caribbean. I guess
right,
it's
right,
like
right.
they
But
stopped doing that.
I'm talking about like if someone attacked us and we had an actual war, Pete Hegseth trying to run the DOD would be terrifying because he's so incompetent. But it also applies to Trump is doubling down on Howard Lutnick, who lied about his Jeffrey Epstein ties, which let me tell you something. There is no gain for Trump to doing that and lots to lose in terms of standing by Lutnick. It's standing by Kristi Noem, who is utterly incompetent at DHS. In fact, DHS this morning just hired someone to do social media who was fired for white supremacist stuff from the Department of Labor.
He
Like,
wasn't fired. He
er,
just basically was promoted to do the same, to promote the same kind of white supremacist social media stuff at HHS, which is a much bigger Twitter feed.
yeah, I'm just like, I can go on and on and on where Trump has, quite frankly, lightweights. They are the C team, and he's just letting them stay in place and continue to make things worse for himself. Like is just that's the bottom line. These people are incompetent. They really
Yes, they're
are.
incompetent. And to that point, I want to bring up two things really quick. The news broke last night that the DOJ attempted to indict and arrest six sitting Democratic lawmakers, including Mark Kelly, Senator from Arizona, Alyssa Slotkin, Jason Crow. I'm forgetting the other three.
I
Christy
think it was Chrissy
Houlihan.
Houlihan.
Yeah.
There was another woman in the house. I think I'm blanking on it.
But the
Yeah,
point here is that they tried to indict them for sedition, um, because of the comments they made in a video last year, reminding those in the military not to carry out illegal orders. Uh, Again, they were just simply stating what is the rules that guide the military when it comes to illegal orders. So they tried to indict them, which in itself is bad, and then they failed. They did not get a grand jury to go along with them. I mean, the old joke about grand jury, you can get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich. Apparently, that's too much even for this incompetent Department of Justice.
Mhm.
I mean, look, if we lived in a healthy democracy, then there'd be articles of impeachment drafted already over this.
Yeah,
This is such a gratuitous abuse of presidential power to sick the Department of Justice on Trump's political rivals, and like that alone, to try to indict members of a co-equal branch of government for expressing free speech,
political opinions.
political opinion, which they, by the way, have enormous protections to say whatever the hell they want. Um, But to do that is incredibly undemocratic, incredibly dangerous. But the fact that the grand jury wouldn't even go along with it tells you how weak this case was and how this was just a malicious and vengeful prosecution. Again, if we lived in a healthy democracy, he'd be impeached by this by the
Yeah.
end of the week. It's
I,
that bad.
I'm picturing the baseball umpire who heard a player swear at him and immediately ejecting him. That's what Trump has basically done. Like, do not pass go, be immediately impeached. The members were Chris Deluzio from Western Pennsylvania,
Right.
Chrissy Houlihan, and Maggie Goodlander from New Hampshire were the other ones. But
Right.
this is something that is so egregious, so inappropriate that we've gotten some quotes from Republicans today. This is Chuck Grassley, the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, who's been in the Senate since 1980, again, my favorite trivia question, has been in elected office since the Eisenhower administration,
Incredible.
which is always just kind of floors me to some extent. But Chuck Grassley came out and ripped this. Then we've got here's a
Well, you saw what
quote.
Mike Johnson said. Mike Johnson basically
Yes,
supported what Trump was doing because
yeah,
Mike Johnson is a fucking weasel. Sorry for
no,
the profanity, but
no,
he's the worst.
and I want to drill into something there, okay, which is, and I will read you some of these quotes in a minute, but I want to drill into something here because I can't think of a speaker who had less allegiance to their branch of government, to the
Agreed.
House as an institution. Mike Johnson has an institutional responsibility to protect the House. That speakers have always seen it that way, just like the Chief Justice sees himself as sort of the caretaker of the Supreme Court. Um, and here is Mike Johnson being saying, no, I have to brown nose that much to Trump to say that,
Yep.
yes, it's fine to indict them. Now, Michael was talking about broad protections. There's this thing called the speech and debate clause of the Constitution. Okay. It is they have a separate clause. This isn't just free speech, in other words. This is a separate clause protecting them to say things, and it absolutely covers um more than anything else, political comments, right? Like that's just the basics of it. And it is just absolutely obscene that he will not stick up for the branch. And again, Tim Sheehy, this is a senator from Montana. The video is stupid and the attempt to indict them is stupid too. Roger Weicker from the chair of the Armed Services Committee, quite appropriate they weren't indicted. Was his word. Like we're talking about something that these are Republicans who absolutely understand that, first of all, they don't want this precedent because there's going to be a Democratic attorney general at some point, and they don't want to be at risk. But like Mike Johnson won't even defend his own branch of government. And finally, Grassley on this. I think our law enforcement people ought to be spending their time on making our community safe and going after real lawbreakers, and that is the president pro tem of the Senate, the most senior member, saying basically this is horseshit,
Yep.
and it is just so inappropriate, and it just exposes Mike Johnson. History is going to judge him more unkindly, I think, than almost any other Republican for this era, because he has allowed Congress's power to be weakened. He has done nothing to defend his branch. And I mean, we saw it again last night. They lost a rule vote in the House.
Yep.
Now, first of all, pre Kevin McCarthy, Mike Johnson era, speakers didn't lose rule votes because they didn't put something on the floor if they didn't have the votes for
They
the
didn't
rule.
have the votes, right?
This guy just likes to lose them, put it on the floor. He tried to package something in a rule that would prevent any resolution challenging Trump's tariffs through the summer. And three Republicans said, no, we're tired of this. We went with you before. We're not doing this again. But again, it was, hey, let's take away the power of us to even have a vote on something because it might anger, to use a term that the Republicans liked a lot, the big guy,
Right.
so to speak, in this kind of thing. And it's just absolutely mind blowing to me, that they're just so awful
Yeah.
and so corrupt, and this is impeachable in every sense of the
Look,
word.
there was a big story this week where Trump just in this absolutely maniacal post, basically said that he's gonna impose tariffs on Canada because the bridge that's being built between Michigan and Canada, he claimed, that's benefiting Canada too much. I will say that there was a great line in the social media in the two social posts where he said, that because of the Canadian making all these trade deals with China, China is going to eliminate hockey and get rid of the Stanley Cup, which I thought was like truly hilarious. And like honestly, if you told me that this was just like a troll, like this was like an Andy Kaufman like troll, I would just like be like, this is the evidence of it. It's like it diverges into self parody. I mean, the thing with that, there's two things. One is, wow, I mean, I bet Mike Rogers really appreciated this. Like
Whoa,
that
whoa,
bridge
whoa,
as
whoa, whoa, wait a second. You didn't get to the best part. John James, the leading Republican for governor, and Mike Rogers, the Republican for senator, quickly chimed in that the president was right and that they supported him on this, which is politically suicidal.
it's amazing.
And you go on and tell the corruption part of the story
So the
here.
corruption part of it is that I guess the American, I don't know who it was again, but
There's
somebody who had.
a
Go ahead.
businessman who owns another bridge,
That's right. That's what
a
it was. Thank you.
competing bridge,
Yeah.
met with, I think it was Lutnick on Monday, and then Trump immediately Truth Socialed this. And this is a new public bridge that would be a competitor to his bridge.
The
And
level of corruption, it's off the fucking charts. It's incredible.
it really is. They don't
I
even
want to
try to hide it.
They don't try to hide anymore. I want to get to Lennox in a second. I want to mention it just because just saw this on Twitter, popped up. Elliot Morris, his polling average has Trump at a new low, 38% approval, 38.8, and disapproval of 57.4. So
Let me
yeah,
make one more
bad.
point on approval.
Okay,
Um,
then I want to move on to
yeah,
something else. But go ahead.
Yeah, but just one point on approval. One thing that I've been watching and that I think is really important is I'm not surprised that he's down in the high 30s. Okay. But one difference between Trump in his first term and presidents like Jimmy Carter and George W. Bush is they dipped into the 20s. And Trump never kind of fell below the like high 30s, like 36, 37, 38, somewhere in there. And I've wondered, can he get lower? What's the nadir for him? Because his base is so in love with Donald Trump, and it's like a cult. Uh, the next few weeks and months are going to be very, very, very interesting on this point because if he keeps going down, I think you're going to have, or, you're going to see losses in November that are way worse than 2018,
Yeah,
relatively speaking.
agreed.
And I think that you're going to see him become much more of a lame duck, and you might even see some Republicans um, distance themselves from him if he gets down, lower. But it's a real question. It's the thing I'm watching is can he go lower? Is this a floor in that 36, 37, 38 area?
I will say this: as long as he's in the high 30s, you're probably going to see Republicans stick with him because
Yep.
in red states, 37% might stink for the country, but it means he's probably,
Over
you know,
50.
well, at least close to it in red states. So I think that you're not going to see them abandon him unless he goes really low. The thing that's striking is that the ones who are in like purple states or swing districts are just. I think they're screwed, but maybe they don't realize how screwed they really are. I want to just bring up. We're going to finish up relatively soon. I want to bring up something that I need to make a little bit of a mea culpa because a couple weeks ago said I just wasn't that focused on the Epstein story and the Epstein files, and that I thought that there was more smoke than fire with the story. Part of me still thinks that there's more smoke than fire, only in the sense that I think a lot of the more lurid allegations about Epstein's cohort, people around him, is may looks to me a little. It might be exaggerated a little bit. But what I think I had wrong, and I think has shown the last week or two, is this story is one that has captured people's imagination. People are very focused on this story, on Epstein and what's in the files. And what is interesting to me is that in Europe, this story has had a huge impact. You saw a major labor minister, Mendelssohn, who had to step down because of his connections to Epstein. You saw, I think, the foreign minister in Slovakia or deputy foreign minister in Slovakia had to step down. You've seen a bunch of European figures who have been caught up in this. What's interesting is it hasn't happened so much in the U.S., although I mean, there's been some of it. There's a guy, the CBS News contributor, who for some reason, Paul Audio, for some reason, who like we had some really bad stories about him, who for some reason Barry Weiss continues to support and defend. I don't understand why. But the Lutnick story, there was a great thing about this story about a couple of days ago that Republicans on the Hill are saying like this Lutnick thing is a real problem for us, and Trump basically saying I don't care. I like Lutnick. He's good on the tariffs for me, and so the White House doesn't give a shit, and they play down this Epstein story. I think it has really. I think it has contributed to the erosion in Trump's support, but particularly among Republicans. This is a story that has been on the conservative fever swamp radar screen for years now, and he's all over these files. People around him are all over these files, and it does look like he's trying to cover the stuff up. I mean, we still don't have all of the unredacted information from these files, so I think this is a story that just has had a lot of legs. I thought I didn't know if it was the best thing for Democrats to be focusing on, but clearly I was wrong. This is a story that people gets people's attention.
I was with Michael on this because I think that my rule is always in politics. Does it affect people's lives? Is it something where it's translatable to the average American's life, in which case I think it's more important. And so I also underestimated the power of this. But I think where Michael is right is that there's a portion of the MAGA base that really cares about this. And in so much as Trump is losing some of his base, it's on this issue. It's that they really have had these files have had an outsized importance to these folks. And there's a lot of conspiracy series stuff on in the MAGA base. Obviously, they buy a lot of things that they see on the internet, and
Yeah.
so the Epstein files was sort of I don't want to call it the Magna Carta of like the conspiracy world, but it was like it was this big thing. It was the big
You might say
kind
it's the
of
protocol of the never mind. Never mind.
it was a big deal to them. And I don't get the Lutnick thing at all because it's a C-level cabinet spot. Like we're not talking about anything. And I mean, I think some of the difference between Europe and the US has been overblown in that the people who've been forced to resign are in politics.
Sure.
And there's much more of an accountability mechanism there. But Lutnick, like, man, you just have a millstone hanging around your neck that's alienating people in your own base. And it really is something. Now, the one warning I would say to Democrats on this issue is there's a lot of people throwing around allegations that were made in the files, treating them as though they were truths.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I
yeah.
do think that we have to be careful about
Yes.
making our party the conspiratorial one here, where just because someone said Donald Trump did something or someone said someone else did something doesn't mean that they did. If
Yes.
it's not, if there's
That's right.
not some evidence beyond an allegation, I personally won't repeat those kinds of
Yeah.
things. I think that there is a mistake to believe them to be true, and I think that you can overplay your hand because some of these allegations are frankly completely and totally outlandish
Right.
and are probably false.
What I think is by the way, those of you who are here again, I just want to mention if you haven't subscribed to Brian's Substack, The Truth About Brian, please
Or
do.
The World
And
According to Brian. You
I'm
can bind our
sorry,
Substacks.
Jesus
You
Christ.
combine them. This is great. Michael is Truth and Consequences. I am The World According to Brian.
I
They are perfect complements to each other.
I
Michael writes you
apologize, Brian.
columns.
That
That's
was
okay.
unacceptable. The
My,
World According to Brian. Please subscribe. If you're not subscribing to Truth and Consequences, truthandcons.com, please do it now. And also, if you like the video, please hit the like button.
yeah.
And again, we're going to finish up relatively soon, but we would love to have like a quick round of questions. If you have any questions you want to ask, please put them in there. But I
And
will,
just
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to just make a note. We will not be with you next week. Michael is going on
Yes,
a well-deserved vacation. And just a point for those who like this, we are usually at this time slot, but I have some conflicts in March and April. So stay tuned, follow us, subscribe, and we will let you know when we're going to be on with you each week. I haven't
yes.
even broached this to Michael, but I've been thinking about maybe some election night lives on some of those weeks
We should
because we
consider
have
that.
election. Yeah.
Certainly, the Texas primary would be fun to cover.
Especially because, yeah, I
Uh,
can't do Wednesday, so I was like, maybe we do Tuesday night that week.
Maybe do Tuesday night.
Yeah.
So yeah, just so we're clear, next week we will be off. I am going to be out of the country. I'm going to be actually in Morocco. Very excited about that. I've never been.
I'm
This
somewhat
is a trip.
concerned they're not going to let Michael back in. Uh,
I mean, always a concern, always a concern, people who know me, but let's hope that doesn't happen. Very excited for this trip and, first vacation I've taken, without my kids in I don't know how many years, but a long time. So, that's
oh, one
but
other scheduled thing. When we come back in 2 weeks, Connor Lamb, the former congressman from Pennsylvania, will be with us, and it's going to be a big episode because it's the day after the State of the Union.
oh, there you
So
go.
it will be very, very interesting. We will break down everything that Trump said the night before. Please don't try to play a State of the Union drinking game because he might kill you.
Yeah,
Um,
no, we're not gonna do that. I hate the State of the Union, generally speaking, and
oh God, yes.
that I have to watch it to comment on it the next day is really unfair. But I wanna get back to Epstein for a second. I just think the thing on the Epstein story, the one that is I think what sort of look, I was gonna make this point earlier that you said earlier, like, stories that don't affect people you're sort of skeptical of the impact of those. I'm going to make a caveat to that. Stories that are metaphors always also tend to have legs. So when Trump tried well, didn't try to, he did tear down the White House, the East Room to build a ballroom. That was a metaphor for what this administration has done. I mean, look, the Alex Preddy shooting is not a metaphor. Somebody died, but it was also in a way symbolic of how far off the rails Trump's immigration strategy had gone over the or campaign of mass deportation had gone over the past year. I mean, with Epstein is I think it does really highlight the level of, elite corruption. I mean, the thing about Epstein that I personally find so disturbing is how many people willing to spend time with this man even after he had been convicted and gone to jail for molesting, an underage girl. I mean, I would not do that personally, and not that it was ever an option, but I wouldn't wanna be around somebody or be friends with somebody who had done something like that. It's disgusting, and I do think that, I it's, this is a I'm gonna go far
And
afield here. But
by the way,
go
we're
go
not being partisan here because Obama's White House counsel looked as bad as anyone in some of what's
Kathy
been
was it
really.
Rummler is her name?
Yeah, Rumel. I don't know how to pronounce it, but Rumler.
She's I mean, she was all over the Epstein files and all over, talking with him, communicating with him. But I was thinking about this in relation so I do this podcast, That '70s Movie Podcast with my friend Jonathan Kirsch. We talk about '70s movies. We did Chinatown a few weeks ago with Ron Brownstein joined us. And, I was thinking about the Roman Polanski who, directed Chinatown and who has fled the country in 1970s because he had pleaded guilty to sexually molesting a 13-year-old girl. And I thought at the time how gross it was that so many, um, actors, so many, Hollywood stars continued to work with Polanski even after, these allegations came out. And again, he pleaded guilty to this allegation. And so I think about this a lot, like, this speaks to some sort of level of maybe look, maybe in an ordinary thing, people just they try to compartmentalize things, but there's something about sort of maybe an elite level of corruption that allows people to look past these kinds of this kind of behavior that I don't understand how people do it, frankly. Like I could not look past somebody. I would not that it was an option, but I wouldn't want to work in a Roman Polanski film knowing what he had done and that he had taken no responsibility for his actions. And I don't understand people who could do the same thing with Epstein. I don't get it, and I get why people are upset about it. And I don't like again. I think a lot of the interest in the story is revolves around the sort of conspiratorial theories, conspiracy theories. But I just think in general, like this is gross. And people who interacted with Epstein even after he went to jail are gross, and I find the whole thing kind of disgusting.
I would co-sign all of that with one small caveat. I think people who are distinctly less powerful than Jeffrey Epstein, I can understand someone who felt like they didn't have a choice because of the power dynamic and the fact that he was this important. But for all of these, like, the guy who stepped down from the law firm, who was a managing partner of a law firm, Obama's White House counsel, you can go on and on, these wealthy and powerful people from every walk of life who said, "Yeah, he's a cool guy. We're fine with that Epstein guy. He can stay in our social circle." It's just disgusting. and it really says something about their lack of character, and about the culture of where we are, that like because he was rich and famous and fit their social circle, they were fine with that. And so I do think that it's really deeply problematic. And I think that it's something that does hurt Republicans, because it does point to that corruption. And the ballroom is such a good analogy. Trump was positing the other day that the ballroom is going to be used for inaugurations, which problem, Donnie. The inaugurations have to be at the Capitol. That's like stipulated by law. But like it is just a sign of his lawlessness, of his corruption, of the ostentatiousness that he
Yes.
sees himself almost like a king in everything that he can do. And it's very similar that these things are metaphors for the things that people don't
Yes.
like that's happening right
Yes.
now. I think that's absolutely the right way to look at it.
I just think that a lot of times people understand politics in not the way that you and I do, Brian, and the way that many of you who are on this or listening to us today do, because we are really immersed in it. So people think about politics as in metaphorical terms, and I think that that's why, for example, I think that the White House, the East Ballroom, the ballroom story had such an effect because it was like, oh, this is what he's doing. He's destroying things that are, that are important and destroying thing. He's undermining the foundations of the country. I think the Kilmar Garcia story was obviously more than a metaphor. This poor man was sent to a torture prison in El Salvador. But I do think that it was a metaphor for how off the rails Trump's immigration policy had gone. Um, I want to mention though, I'm going to digress for 1 second because there's a news story out. While I'm talking, I usually follow
So do I. If you
what's
ever
happening on Twitter.
If you see me looking to the side, that's exactly what I'm doing.
Yeah, me
Computer's right
too.
there.
Me too.
We're looking
Me
at
too.
Twitter, and we have to in the Trump era. That's the downside. We don't have commercial breaks like a radio show, so we can't check in during the break, and you have to be connected because
Right.
Trump is constantly doing batshit insane things.
So I want to read you this headline. This is, I guess, Bloomberg Law broke this story. This is related to the attempted indictment of six Democratic lawmakers yesterday. The Department of Justice lawyer who tried and failed to indict six Democratic lawmakers over military videos runs an active dance photography studio and worked for U.S. Attorney Jeannie Pirro decades ago. Both prosecutors on the case had no prior federal backgrounds as experts were walled off. Again, this is like the total corruption of the Department of Justice, the total corruption that you have Jeannie Pirro, who should not be a U.S. Attorney for District of Columbia, who is a Trump partisan, who then brings in prosecutors who have no experience in prosecuting cases to go after Trump's political rivals. And I'm sure in large part because the people who are civil servants simply will not take on these cases and will not prosecute cases because look, the people who are pushing these cases could face disbarment over this, right? This is a
Should.
violation of should get disbarred over this. This is a violation of sort of ethical canons for lawyers, and so that's why you have such incompetence. Because first of all, these cases are joke cases, and the people who are trying to prosecute them are terrible lawyers, and it's why, like, when they attempted to go after Tisha James and Lisa Cook and Jerome Powell and Adam Schiff, they failed. I mean, Bondi today basically said openly, I mean, as openly as you can, that John Brennan is going to get indicted next. I mean, these people are just what's so frustrating is that we spent how many years listening to these people talk about Biden and Merrick Garland weaponizing Department of Justice against conservatives. This
Which was
is
a lie.
which
A
was a
total
lie.
and complete lie. If anything, Merrick Garland went out of his way not to charge people in
Not
the Trump
not to weaponize.
administration, not to weaponize the DOJ. And I mean, I just keep thinking Pam Bondi makes me yearn for John Mitchell, who was also corrupt and went to jail. If you've ever, mugshot the Attorney General of the United States going to jail over things. But I mean, she is someone who should be impeached, removed, tried, and convicted because this is the most corrupt part of the Trump administration. This is something that his first term attorney generals. I'd love to see somebody get Jeff Sessions on the record on this, or even William Barr, because they wouldn't have done what Pam Bondi is doing. And it is just monumentally corrupt. It's Banana Republic stuff. It's inappropriate. every adjective, negative adjective that you can think of basically applies to the way that Pam Bondi and I think it's Todd Blatch, is her
Yeah.
deputy, have handled things in the DOJ. It is so nakedly partisan in a way that I don't think any attorney general outside of the Nixon folks have done in the modern era in either party, and frankly is something that again, if I were a Republican member of Congress, I would be speaking out against this. I would be back channeling saying Bondi has to go because I'd be afraid of what a similarly partisan Democratic attorney general could do. One thing that is true about politics, and we're seeing this in the redistricting wars, Republicans are losing their minds over Virginia, but what goes around comes around. If you break a norm and you change the rules, the other side isn't just going to say, "Oh yes, we will go back to being good little boys and girls," while you rebels win because you break all of the rules. That's not how it works. If you want to go there, know the other side's going to do the same thing. And look, I'm a good government type. I'm not comfortable with some of this stuff, the hardest core kind of use of power, the brass knuckles style of things. But that's the reality. It may not be good for the country, but what goes around comes around, and Republicans are creating real problems for themselves.
So I got into a little bit of this, into this, with Tim Carney, who's a columnist for the Washington Examiner, where he complained about Democrats. He said Democrats in Virginia should have stopped because, well, after Texas, California responded, and so they were even. Like, it's not how that works, dude. Sorry.
No,
Just
it's like you punch a guy in the face and expect him to stop with
like,
one
oh, you can
punch
only punch
back.
me back in the face. You can't do
You
anything
you get
else.
one
You get one
punch.
punch. No,
Yeah, that's how it works. I mean, you
it's not
you
how that works.
you start these wars, understand that the other side is going to end them. And
So, yeah,
it's just
exactly.
crazy.
But what I pointed out to him was like, first of all, it wasn't just Texas, right? Republicans redistricted in North Carolina and Missouri, adding 1 seat in each state. They did in Ohio, sort of, potentially adding a seat to their coffers. They still could do it in Florida. The reality is that, they've done it in numerous states. If anything, you should encourage Virginia to do it so they can keep up with all the places Republicans have tried to redistrict. But again, to your point, you don't get to break the rules and then whine when the other side does
Yeah.
the same thing. And look, I got to say, this is a different Democratic Party that doesn't give a shit about the fact that they are getting that they are breaking the rules or being hypocritical. I mean, first of all, to credit a lot of Democrats, Newsom said this in California. I think the Virginia Democrats have said it. They've been like, look, this was not our preferred path. We support nonpartisan gerrymandering, but you guys gave us no choice. And I mean, it's exactly right. You cannot allow a party to do what the Republicans did in Texas and not respond in kind. And the reality of it is that when all is said and done, I expect Democrats to gain more seats from mid-decade redistricting than Republicans.
With the possible caveat of if the Supreme Court junks the Voting Rights Act over, that will influence it. But otherwise, I agree with Michael. And look, the reform that Michael supports, that I am most hesitant to support, court packing, is something where it's the same principle. Republicans have played absolute hardball with the Supreme Court, going back to Mitch McConnell not giving Merrick Garland a vote, and then immediately finding an exception to the rule to make sure that Amy Coney Barrett would get onto the court. And I warned people then. I said, look, I don't like court packing. I don't support court packing, but it's legal. And if you are maximizing your advantage to the maximum extent possible under the law, when it comes to ideologically trying to control the Supreme Court, the other side is going to act in kind.
Right.
And Democrats have always been a little bit hesitant, despite Republican theories about Democrats, because I do think that we are the party of good government. We believe fundamentally, from an ideological standpoint, the government needs to be ethical. The government needs to work, and we've always been a little bit hesitant, but it really is striking, what Louise Lucas, the Senate president, or she's no, she's the House, I think. the House leader in
Yeah.
Virginia, and Newsom in California. They said, no, we're not just going to play by the rules and let you get a massive advantage here, guys. We are going to fight back in kind, and it may blow up on Republicans, that they did this. So I really think that everything that they are doing in the Trump administration is creating a precedent that, in some way, shape, or form, the next Democratic president or Democratic presidents thereafter will take advantage of.
So
Um,
I want to just pick up. This is going to be a bank shot in pool way. I'm going to get to this, but about the Supreme Court, Larry Simon, a longtime subscriber of Truth and Consequences. Love you, Larry. Thank you for being here. He said in the comment, "I hold Mitch McConnell and Merrick Garland responsible for our current state. Mitch could have voted for indictment. Well, voted for what's it called, conviction on the second impeachment. I think you mean. And Garland wasted too much time." I mean, look, I think the criticism of Garland is fair, but I'm a little. I want to just make this point. I think it's worth remembering that Jack Smith indicted Trump for January 6th. In was it 2023? I believe it
yeah, I
was,
think it was the summer of 2023.
and that trial would have moved forward if not for the fact that our corrupt and partisan Supreme Court took up the case and then waited months to issue a ruling, which basically gave the president of the United States was approximating of a get out of jail free card. So, had the court not intervened, that case would have probably gone to trial before 2024. And then on the Mar-a-Lago case of the classified document
It
case,
didn't exist.
well,
Ugh. Well,
it
what
didn't
I'm saying,
exist.
I'm sorry, in
Wait, wait,
2021.
yeah, it didn't occur until 21 or 22, I believe. But you know, Smith moved forward pretty quickly with the indictment on that, and the only reason that didn't move forward was because it was assigned to a partisan Republican judge, Eileen Cannon, who basically slow rolled the case so that it would never come to trial. So I understand the criticism of Garland. I think there are legitimate points to be made about what Garland did, but in fairness, the reason the January 6th trial, did not move forward was because of the Supreme Court, which is gets to my point that Democrats simply cannot accept a Supreme Court that is as partisan and as corrupt as this current Supreme Court, and which has been, look, Trump has a point. Trump did not win a majority of the vote. I think let me think about this. Is it Bush and Trump both lost the popular vote, and they've appointed, I believe, all six
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
conservatives
yeah,
on the
yeah.
court, right?
Um,
That's not a
no, I'm
democratic
sorry.
solution.
Bush Senior appointed Thomas.
That's right, 5
Thomas
out of 6.
Thomas
Thank you.
has been there for 34 years.
He's almost the longest serving justice, God help us. But Roberts, Alito, were appointed by Bush, and then Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett were appointed by Trump. So I just think this speaks to how undemocratic the structure of our political system is fucked up. But well, no, it was 2 years after January 6th, Larry. But I'm just gonna say for the record, like, that's the problem, is that we have a partisan Supreme Court. But look, you're right. Had Garland brought
I
the case earlier, it's possible that it would have gone to trial, but I don't think it would have, because the Supreme Court would have weighed in earlier and basically given Trump protection from the case, which they
Let
did.
me offer a limited defense of Merrick Garland. I certainly don't think Merrick Garland is the antithesis of a partisan warrior, right? He spent 20 years in the appeals court, um, operating as a nonpartisan player. But remember, Joe Biden ran in 2020 as, I'm going to restore norms. I'm going to restore normal. That, people still at the time, I think we forget that now. We're thinking of Trump as kind of an aberration, as hey, we had the perfect storm in the electoral college where by these very narrow margins this fluke won. Remember, Republicans got wiped out in 2018, okay? And Biden wins in 20, and there's a sense to some that this is a fluke. And I think that as the incoming attorney general, if your president's run on restoring norms, restoring basic things, you don't really want to do something that is completely and totally unprecedented and that can be portrayed as going after your opponent. You don't want to immediately turn around and indict um the last president. And it's worth noting that the case on which Trump was absolutely most guilty from a legal standpoint was the documents case. And that
Oh,
case came together slowly over 2021, 2022. The way this works is the National Archives says, "Hey,
yeah.
you've got documents." And then they had to deny that, and then they found out they were classified, and then it's got to get referred to the DOJ. It takes time. You
I-
know, so
I'm also going to
I'm
make the point that I talked to a bunch of federal prosecutors when those cases went forward. I wrote a piece sort of defending Garland. A lot of them made the point to me that these cases are very hard to bring.
right.
They're very hard to put the evidence together. And when you're taking on somebody as politically powerful as Trump, the cases have to be airtight. And so there is the point of this one person said to me was like, look, I get the criticisms of Garland, but I also feel like, you want in this case for him to approach a case like this with to avoid any indication of impartiality. And look, the reality is, and I hate to say this because people are going to piss me for saying it, but like when you're a president and your Department of Justice is prosecuting the guy that you replaced as president, all right, and who was like likely to run against you in 2024, like that is a very fraud prosecution,
Yeah.
right? And part of me, I'm going to be honest with you, part of me is a little bit uncomfortable about that because I do think it does play into the argument that you're prosecuting this person so that they can't run against you. Now, I don't think that's what happened, but I
No.
think you have to sort of take that into account, and you have to take into account the fact that a lot of people are going to view it that way. And so you want to be, if you're going to bring a case like this, you want to make sure that the case is as solid as possible. I think that's what Garland did. So I get the criticisms of Garland, but I also feel like they're a little bit unfair. And I think people who would say we should have charged Trump on day one, not so simple, right? I mean, a lot of stuff that we found out about Trump's engulfment on January 6th came from the congressional, hearings,
Investigation.
and those took months and years to come together.
And
So,
also, let's be clear. On day one of the Biden administration, I think we all could have agreed that it was clear that Donald Trump had done something impeachable and that the Senate should have convicted him and barred him from holding office.
yes,
But it
and that's on
wasn't
Mitch McConnell.
necessary. Right. I don't even blame McConnell because I'm not sure McConnell could have brought enough Republicans along.
Well, he could have
I
tried.
blame this on the party itself. And I think what's very important to understand here is I don't know that it was obvious that he had committed a crime, that anyone could articulate what the crime was that he had committed on
Right,
day one of the Biden administration.
right,
It took time, it took getting this information to know that he had actually violated criminal law. Gross misconduct and dereliction of duty isn't necessarily a crime under the law. That's something, it can be distinct. It can be impeachable without being criminal.
right.
I think that was what Mitch McConnell, you could argue got wrong was saying, well, he can still be held accountable with the legal process. No, I think impeachment was, the first and easiest way to hold him accountable. So
Yeah,
I do think that's true, and I agree with Michael. It's very fraught when you start trying to prosecute your political opponents, which is one reason why what Pam Bondi is doing is so inappropriate and
right.
so awful. In a democracy, that's really fraught and it's really dangerous. And Democrats are going to face this question again in 2029. Um, but it really is a
I
problem.
just think that when you're going to prosecute your likely political rival in the next presidential election, that case better be fucking airtight. That's all I'm going to say. I mean, it's got to be airtight because not only do you want to make sure there's no question that this is a political prosecution, but you also have to reassure the millions of Americans who voted for Trump that this is not a political prosecution. And the way to and look, you're not going to reassure many of them because they're going to believe whatever Trump tells them, whatever bullshit Trump tells them. But you do have to. But that doesn't mean you don't try to do that. I think there's lots of places Democrats should be playing hardball. Lots of places, like packing the court, like making DC and Puerto Rico states, like getting rid of the filibuster, like ending partisan gerrymandering. Those are all like expanding the House. Those are all things I think Democrats should do. They're all small d democratic. They're all have precedence in American history. They're all good ideas. But when it comes to the rule of law, you got to be a little more what's the word I'm looking for? You have to play hardball, but you
Judicious?
also have judicious. Perfect word, Brian. Perfect word, judicious. You have to be more judicious. So in that respect, I do think that Garland probably handled it properly. I think. I mean, but again, I don't like blaming him. I don't like it
No,
because ultimately, as you said, it shouldn't have come to that.
but
Fucking Republicans should have impeached him and convicted him. The Supreme Court should not, like as I said before, if the Supreme Court had not intervened in the case and taken up this, like there was an appeals court ruling that basically I think it was 3-0 against Trump that said this prosecution could go forward, and the Supreme Court took it up and then issued this ridiculous decision that basically gives the president of the United States a get out of jail free card. Um, so I think that blame the court, don't blame Merrick Garland.
And, I have one other problem with the Merrick Garland blaming that we hear on the left, which is, I think the American people deserve a significant portion of this blame. The fact is,
100%.
this information was out there, and people blaming Merrick Garland for not putting Trump in jail and saving America, um, is, I think, really not fair to him, because the bottom line is the American people chose to look at Donald Trump, look at the norm breaking, the law breaking, the constant misbehavior, the erratic temperament, the total and manifest unfitness to hold the job, and said, yeah, we want that guy back. This isn't 2016 where you could say, oh, they looked at him and said, the system is broken. We need someone who's different and new and fresh, and let's take a chance on him. This is We saw January 6th. We saw it. There were hearings that exposed everything that he did. We saw everything that he did, and Nikki Haley made this case in the Republican primary. Kamala Harris most certainly made this case in the general election. And the fact of the matter is that the voters looked at it and yawned and put him back in office. And that is on the American people.
I
That's not
agree.
on Merrick Garland. That's
I
not even
agree.
on the Supreme Court.
I
It's on us for not being good
I
citizens.
I want to say for the record, like I could read everything that Brian said, and it's actually something that makes me crazy. There's an old joke. I remember reading a column once made this argument that like the first thing you learn in like pundit school is you can never criticize the American people, and I think that's bullshit because I think you know all the claims about well Biden should have dropped out earlier, and which is probably true. Not probably true. It certainly is true that that all may be well and good, but it doesn't excuse the fact that people were willing to vote for this fucking guy to be president again. And I just think that we have this allergy toward holding voters responsible for the choices that they make. And voters knew who Trump was. I mean, in 2016, you could argue they didn't know how bad he would be. I mean, you should have known, but you could maybe make the argument. I think I don't really buy it, but I think, okay, whatever. I'll give people a slight pass on that one. Slight. But by 24, no one gets a pass. He was president for 4 years. He incited a coup, an insurrection. He's a vile individual. He's an idiot. He's a racist. He's a misogynist. He's committed multiple sexual assaults. He's been convicted in a civil court of committing sexual assault. He's a terrible person. And we knew this. We knew this. I mean, you could have voted for if Attila the Hun was reincarnated and came back to the vote and ran a Democrat. I would have voted for him over Donald Trump. I don't I don't like all of Attila the Hun's policies, but nonetheless, that's how bad Trump is. And I just think that we have to hold people responsible for their votes. And people made a choice to vote for this guy, and I don't know what the fuck they were thinking.
Yeah,
And on that note, we need to finish up. I
yeah.
actually have to. I have to jump. So, God, 1,100 people in here today. That is amazing. I don't know how that happened because we had like about 250 or 300 last week. But God bless. I'm so
Thank
glad you
you.
guys were all
Thank you for
here.
being here.
Thank you so
Um,
much.
so subscribe to Truth and Consequences, subscribe to The World According to Brian, and come back in 2 weeks, and
Yeah,
we will talk to you about the State of the Union.
we'll be back in 2 weeks after the State of the
Amberly
Union.
and Patricia, who just came in, yeah, come back in 2 weeks. We will be back 1 o'clock in 2 weeks.
Or you could subscribe to Truth and
Yeah.
Consequences because the entire video that we up today
Oh yeah.
will be
No, I posted too. It goes on both
it'll
of them.
also be at the World According to Brian.
Yep.
Exactly.
You can watch the whole video at your leisure. You can share it with your friends and family members. In fact, we strongly recommend that.
We urge you to do
And
so.
yeah, we urge you to do so, and we really appreciate your support.
We love it.
Michael,
We really do appreciate it. It means the world to us. We do this because we enjoy talking to each other. We enjoy talking about politics, but we really enjoy when people come in and join us and comment, and we hope that we've imparted a small bit of political wisdom for you when we do these chats. So thank you
yeah,
so much, guys.
amen.
And we'll see you in 2 weeks. Have a good
Have a
break.
good vacation,
Brian,
Michael.
thank you very much. I will. And we'll see you in 2 weeks, guys.
All right,
Thanks a lot.
take care.
Bye bye.
Bye.